Hello and welcome, and thank you for taking the time to check out our latest video upload on it's probably outdated, a new Bruce Lee bio debunks myths about the Kung Fu Jesus. Bruce Lee's fight with Chuck Norris in The Way of the Dragon is considered one of the best fight scenes of all time. Lee was considered unbeatable. Now a new bio explores his flaws. Bruce Lee was training a friend one day when he did something unexpected. The star of the classic film Enter the Dragon was already known for his fanatical fitness regimen. He didn't smoke or drink. He gobbled vitamin supplements and drank raw blended hamburger meat. He transformed himself into a lithe figure who could do 2-finger push-ups and send burly men flying with his famed 1-inch punch. But Lee ended the training session at his home on this particular day with a different type of flourish. He lit a joint and started puffing away. It came from a box of marijuana cigarettes he kept in his garage. Lee would later move on to hashish, carrying it around in little bags and nibbling on it like edibles. It raises the consciousness level, Lee explained when another martial artist asked him why he got high. That's not the type of story one typically hears about Lee. Since he died at age 32, his legend has grown to such mythological levels that one martial artist calls him Kung Fu Jesus. A new biography, though, debunks some of the most popular myths about the man. Bruce Lee, A Life by Matthew Polly, is the first in-depth account of Lee's journey from a street-brawling teenager to a global icon. The book, which comes on the 45th anniversary of Lee's death, features interviews from everyone from his childhood classmates to friends who saw him smoke up to the woman who last saw him alive. Lee's charisma, ambition and relentless appetite for combat leapt off the pages. You can practically hear his cat-like shrieks in some of the most vivid sections. If you think you know Lee, this book may shock you. It's Bruce Lee's role, Kato, in the TV series Green Hornet, made him a star in Hong Kong, and it was changed to the Kato Show. This book may shock you. Among its surprises, Lee was a kinetic genius who could quickly master any martial arts fighting style, but he never learned to ride a bike and was declared medically unfit for the draft after failing his physical. We actually saw him on motorbikes. He talking about an ordinary bicycle. And why did he fail his physical? Probably because he had an inverted testicle, supposedly. He has been portrayed as an impoverished immigrant who came to America to make it big, but he actually grew up in an affluent Hong Kong family with his own chauffeur and 2 live-in maids. He is seen as a Chinese superhero with a statue in Hong Kong, but he was also part Jewish. Yeah, from his mother's side. Matthew Polly, who interviewed at least 100 of Lee's friends and family members, say people often forget that Lee was virtually unknown in the United States when he died. His breakthrough movie, Enter the Dragon, was released less than a month after his mysterious death in Hong Kong in July 1973. Lee is the only major Western icon whose fame is entirely posthumous, says Polly, who as a skinny, bullied kid was inspired by Lee's films to later move to China and study Kung Fu at a Shaolin temple. Lee wasn't just an entertainer, he was an evangelist. Millions took up martial arts because of him, Polly says. No other celebrity changed people's lives in that way, Polly says. Nobody watched the Steve McQueen movie and took up something. People study martial arts because of Lee, and it changed their lives for the better. Bruce Lee has a place in a lot of fans' hearts as a demigod, or what I call, or Matthew Polly calls, a patron saint of Kung Fu. He had a missionary effect. He never apologised for being Asian. He also changed the way many Westerners regarded Asians, Polly's book shows. Lee was the first Asian American actor to embody the classic Hollywood definition of a star. Polly wrote, men wanted to be him and women wanted to be with him. Yeah, that's the bonus that comes with being a superstar, right? Lee's pride in his heritage was contagious. And there's more information here on Bruce. There he is with Linda. Lee, with his wife Linda, was a racial pioneer in many ways. His interracial marriage was rare at the time, and he broke martial arts tradition by teaching students of all races, all colours, right? He didn't care. Wanted to show them the beauty of Chinese martial arts, etc. Polly says he wasn't trying to be salacious. He wanted to show another side of Lee beyond the patron saint of Kung Fu image. He interviewed Lee's widow and daughter for the book, but hasn't heard from them since. It published last month, or that month, whatever. Neither responded to CNN's request for comment. I hope one day that they will see it as it is, Polly said. It was written from a place of love. Davis Miller, author of the Tao of Bruce Lee, says fanboys won't love Polly's book. Those guys need to believe in Kung Fu Jesus, says Miller, whom Polly consulted for his bio. And they're not getting that, they're getting a guy who is human. And taking out Sammy Davis Jr.'s bodyguard. Some information here. Okay, Miller here says that Lee was probably the best martial artist at the time of his death, but wasn't unbeatable. Though Lee trained with and taught martial arts champions like Chuck Norris and Joe Louis, Miller says he's not sure how Lee would have faced in a fight against a top fight boxer, i.e. Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson. He goes on to say, I don't think the guy was ever tested, Miller says. Bruce Lee didn't have the real world experience that boxers had. One man who saw the Lee fight has no doubt about what he could do. Doug Palmer was one of Lee's first students in America. He is one of a small group who trained with and learned directly from Lee. Palmer, who appears in Polly's book, met Lee when the martial artist was 20 and knew him until his untimely death. At one point, Lee even moved in with Palmer's family. He had no compunction, no hesitation about testing himself against the biggest, the fastest and the best in whatever he came across. Palmer, now an attorney in Seattle, told CNN. Lee didn't have many street fights as an adult because he quickly showed would-be aggressors they didn't stand a chance, says Palmer, who is writing a memoir entitled Bruce Lee, Sifu Freeing a Big Brother. Well, we'd see if we could find that. Most challenges he could handle without a fight, Palmer says. The way that he could tie somebody up or hit them at will or deflect their punches at will, it was very clear. Very few people would push that. Polly says everybody he talked to saw Lee spar or fight rendered the same verdict. He was very, very, very good. Polly listed the reasons why Lee was a genius at body movement, who could master any martial arts style. He could read his opponents and know when and how they were going to attack, seemingly before they even moved, and he had otherworldly quickness. Polly says Lee's body was like one giant fast twitch muscle. He fought a lot. He liked to fight. It made him happy, Polly says. Lee would often greet other martial artists and street brawlers with the same invitation: hit me as hard as you can with either hand, whenever you're ready. Polly writes, he would then brush away their punches as easily as would a baby and counter with strikes that would stop inches away from their target. Sometimes Lee didn't hold back. When a Japanese karate expert challenged him, Lee knocked the man out in 11 seconds. But Lee didn't always dominate. Polly tells a charming story of Lee lightly sparring with his first master, the legendary Ip Man, who by that time was elderly but could more than hold his own. Polly tells another story about Lee taking out a humongous bodyguard of Sammy Davis Jr. Lee was accompanying two friends during his days as a struggling actor when the trio ran into the bodyguard near a Las Vegas casino. The man suddenly raised his hand to wave at someone behind Lee, but Lee thought the bodyguard was about to attack him. Quicker than a blink, Lee kicked out one of the bodyguard's legs, locked up his arms, bent him backwards until he was helpless, and went right at his throat with the points of his fingers. Polly writes, the story ended with Lee's apology and the bodyguard asking, "What the hell did you do to me?" and how he really died. Polly offers a more prosaic explanation: heat stroke. He says it's common for heat stroke victims to suffer from swelling of the brain. Lee had several risk factors for heat stroke. He collapsed 3 months earlier after isolating himself in a hot editing room without air conditioning. He'd had his armpit sweat glands removed because he disliked sweat stains on his clothes, and the impending release of Enter the Dragon kept him from sleeping and eating, and so forth. Okay. There's plenty more information here. Okay. So what we're going to do is going to take a look at that particular book by Matthew Polly that we came across. Bruce Lee, A Life by Matthew Polly. available free on public access, public domain, contents page. It's probably very different from the proper version. Knowing others is wisdom, knowing yourself is enlightenment. Lao Tzu. Depends on what Chinese language you're using. Okay, prologue. Tale of two funerals. The crowd of mourners began gathering on the evening of July 24th, 1973 outside the Kowloon funeral parlour in anticipation of the ceremony the next morning. As the appointed hour of 10 a.m. drew closer, their numbers swelled and multiplied until over 15,000 Hong Kong residents stood behind police barricades, looked down from balconies, or perched precariously on the city's famous neon signs to catch a final glimpse of their idol's coffin. 5 days earlier, Bruce Lee had died at the age of 32. Several hundred extra police officers were detailed to control the crowd, wearing lime green shorts and short sleeves shirts, black shoes, knee socks and billed caps. The cops looked like overgrown Boy Scouts on a summer trip. And there's more here. Who's this Ting Pei? Betty Ting Pei, whose apartment Lee had died in. Right. Much to the disappointment of the throng, Betty chose to stay home where she was reported to be under heavy sedation. She sent a wreath instead with a note to Bruce from Ting Pei. Next to it, a tearful 6-year-old boy dropped a spray of flowers with a simple message from a little fan. Oh, how cute. Yeah, there they all there, all the people. And then there's McQueen, Shannon Brandon Lee, James Coburn, probably Dan Santo, James Lee, Robert Lee, all them there at his funeral. There's more information on that funeral. Many mourners refused to leave because they knew this was the last time they would be near the hero. The Hong Kong tabloids had angrily reported that Linda planned to bury her husband in America, making it nearly impossible for the average Chinese fan to visit his grave. Under the headline, Lee's body flies to America tomorrow, the Oriental Daily wrote, Linda has stuck to her guns regarding several things about Lee's death. She is obviously holding some kind of grudge. From the start, Linda wanted to ship Lee's body back to America for autopsy, but due to legal restrictions, she relented. However, the body will be sent to America for burial. Apparently, his brain was sent, or a portion of his brain was sent to New Zealand for them to look at it, all this sort of stuff. Okay, there's more information here on his funeral and everything related to it. And it talks about the pallbearers, who were Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Bruce's assistant Jeet Kune Do instructors, Taka Kimura and Dan Inosanto, his younger brother Robert Lee, and Peter Chin, a family friend from Los Angeles, etc. Excuse me, got Kermit the Frog in my throat. Yeah, Little Dragon, going on about when he was born, who he was born to, etc, etc. Goes on about his father, and Japanese probably invading where they were living, occupying it, right, pushing the imperialism. Okay, so here's about his mother. Grace Ho was a member of the Eurasian Bossman Hodong clan, Hong Kong's equivalent of the Rockefellers or the Kennedys, whose grandfather was Charles Henry Morris Bosman, because I don't know if many people cover her family history. Although many have thought Bosman was German Catholic, Bruce Lee's great grandfather was actually Dutch Jewish. He was born Moses Hartog Bosman in Rotterdam on August 29, 1839. So there you go. Bruce Lee had a touch of Dutch Jewish, German and Chinese. Moses joined the Dutch East Asia Company as a teenager and arrived in Hong Kong in 1859. His fortune was made in the coolie trade. He shipped Chinese peasant labourers to Dutch Guyana to work the sugar plantations after African slavery was abolished, and to California to build the Central Pacific Railroad. His business success led him to be appointed the Dutch consul to Hong Kong in 1866. Given the anti-Semitism of the time, all of his letters to the Netherlands Minister of Foreign Affairs were signed M. Bosman, and so forth. But he fell into serious financial difficulty and went bankrupt in 1869. He abandoned his Chinese family, moved to California, and changed his name to Charles Henry Morris Bosman. To protect her children, Zi Tai became the fourth concubine to a Chinese cattle merchant, Kwok Chung. He had little interest in providing for her Eurasian children and barely gave them enough money to eat. But Zi Tai convinced them to pay for their children's tuition to the prestigious Central School, now Queen's College, where they learned English. Robert Hodom was the eldest son of Zi Tai's 6 children with Bosman. He grew up to become the comprador, foreign agent for Jardine Matheson, the largest trading conglomerate in East Asia. He made his fortune in shipping, etc., etc. And there's more information here. Nothing is known about Grace Ho's English mother or why she gave up her little girl, but Grace was raised by Miss Chung as her daughter. Miss Chung. So maybe that's where their friendship came from with Bruce and William Chung and Hawkins Chung. William Chung being the now Grand Master of Wing Chun Kung Fu, residing in Australia. As the one half English, 1/4 Dutch Jewish and 1/4 Han Chinese child of an elite Eurasian family in colonial Shanghai, Grace Ho's upbringing was very European. Instead of learning to read Chinese characters, she was taught English and French. As a teenager, she studied Western medicine in hopes of becoming a nurse. She also converted to Catholicism, no doubt attracted to its absolute insistence on monogamy and condemnation of polygamy. So she may have taught that to Bruce, okay, insisted on that as a mother, and he may have carried it on into his adult life. So he may not really have played around, okay. He might have been flirty and all that sort of stuff, so like, look at my great abs, look at my muscles, and naturally women want to touch it. Like one older woman he came across on a set, movie set or something. He says, feel my forearms. Right? She felt them. She said they're like velvet, they're really warm and hard as, all that sort of stuff. That's the kind of stuff we would do. Look at my abs. Touch them, all that sort of stuff. Okay. So Grace saw firsthand how miserable it made her adopted mother to compete with a dozen other concubines for the attention of one man. Grace was determined to live a very different life. She wasn't happy with her father's traditional sinful ways, says Phoebe Lee, Bruce's older sister. Instead of accepting an arranged marriage as was common for Chinese and Eurasians of her class, Grace ran off to Hong Kong when she was 18 and moved in with her uncle Robert. Grace became a socialite in Hong Kong, filling her days with fashionable social gatherings. She was wealthy, independent and single throughout her early 20s, a rarity for a Chinese woman in that era, until the day Li Hoi Chun's opera troupe came to Sir Robert Hodong's Idlewood mansion. Sir Robert intended the event for his friends, but his niece Grace Ho asked her uncle to allow her to attend, and so forth. In 1930s China, it was unheard of for a woman to pursue a man, but Grace sought out Li Hoi Chun and charmed him. She just found it fascinating, right? She was deeply moved by his performance, technique, and developed feelings for him. She fell in love because he made her laugh. Yeah, how nice. Okay. Grace was supposed to wed a wealthy Eurasian scion, not the son of illiterate Chinese peasants. Her entire clan was against the relationship. Threats were made, pressure was applied, but Mum was very independent, strong-willed and adaptable, says Robert Lee, and she finally made up her mind she wanted to be with their dad. As a child of two cultures, Grace's choice was a microcosm of the conflict between Western individualism and Chinese tradition, romanticism versus family obligation. In traditional China's patriarchal polygamous culture, Grace Ho wed for love. She wasn't formally disowned, but her decision to elope caused a rupture and she was financially cut off. Grace went from being a wealthy socialite to the wife of a Chinese actor. If Grace had any regrets, she never spoke of them. After her romantic rebellion against her family, she settled comfortably into the life of a simple Chinese wife, dressing plainly, etc., etc. She loved to knit and play mahjong with her friends. Her personality embodied the Chinese ideal for a woman, Wen Rao. Hopefully that's how you say it. Quiet, gentle and tender. My mother was very patient, very kind, capable of controlling her emotions, says Phoebe. She was very refined, didn't talk much, smiling all day, a traditional kind of woman. and so forth. As his wife, it was Grace's duty, Li Hui Chun's wife, it was Grace's duty to support her husband and to produce offspring, especially male heirs. Heirs, right? Heirs. A popular Chinese saying, duo ji duo fu. The more sons, the more happiness. To the utter delight of her husband, Grace's first child was a boy. Tragically, he died when he was 3 months old. Even though infant mortality rates were much higher than now, the loss of a boy was still considered an evil portent, maybe even a sign of curse. When Grace was 8 months pregnant with his second child, the family adopted an infant girl and named her Phoebe. So she was adopted, right? Phoebe Lee. It was odd timing. Hui Chun was struggling to support his mother and his dead brother's family. He didn't need any more mouths to feed. One explanation is Phoebe was a bad omen insurance policy. Superstition dictated the second child must be a girl. If Grace was pregnant with a boy, he was in danger unless he had an older sister. The more likely scenario is Phoebe wasn't a random orphan girl. Hui Chun fathered her with another woman, who, after she gave birth to a daughter instead of a highly valued son, gave the girl to Hui Chun to raise. For her part, Phoebe, who was sensitive about the topic, claims to be a blood relative to her siblings, even though we had different personalities. We were close. Blood is thicker than water. Our genes are the same. A month after Phoebe's adoption, Grace gave birth to another daughter, not a son. She was named Agnes. Phoebe is my adopted daughter, Li Hui Chun told US immigration officials in 1941. She is about 40 days older than my own daughter, Agnes. After Agnes, Grace was soon pregnant and again gave birth to son Peter on October 23rd, 1939. His ear was immediately pierced. That's a Chinese superstition thing, right? Keep away the demons, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And this information here. So that's where that came from. The failure of the government in Kung Fu to protect the Chinese people shattered their self-confidence and brought down the Qing dynasty in 1912, resulting in decades of chaos, warlordism and civil war. China became known as the sick man of Asia. Or sick man of Asia. Okay, so that's a message in the movie Chinese Connection or Fist of Fury. Fist of Fury, that's what they were actually called by the Japs. Okay. Japs were planning to kick all the Westerners out of East Asia and colonise it for themselves. They set their sights on the sick man, or China, the Asian community, right? After grabbing territory along China's periphery, the Senkaku Islands, Taiwan, Korea, and Manchuria, the Japanese launched a full-scale invasion of the mainland on July 7, 1937, advancing rapidly and killing millions. Yeah, they did lots of experiments on all that sort of stuff. Li Hui Chun went to America for theatrical work only and listed his occupation as an actor. On Grace's application, she wrote her purpose was accompanying her husband. She fudged her occupation as actress, wardrobe woman. In fact, she was a housewife and mother. The entire extended family went to the Hong Kong harbour docks, etc., etc. It goes on about Hui Chun and Grace. Okay. She got pregnant in America. A healthy baby boy, 5/8 Han's Chinese, 1/4 English, and 1/8 Dutch Jewish, was born at 7:12 a.m. on November 27, 1940. The neighbours called the Le Kian Chian Chiu Theatre left a message for Hui Chun as a boy. Hand out cigars. First question all his fellow actors asked was, what are his astrological signs? The Chinese zodiac not only assigns one of 12 animals. Okay. Of the 12 birth signs, the dragon is considered the most powerful and propitious. Chinese emperors took the dragon as a symbol, causing it to be associated with leadership and authority. Many Chinese parents tried to time a pregnancy in the hopes that their child would be born in the year, month, day or hour of the dragon. Hui Chun proudly told everyone that his boy was born in the year of the dragon, the month of the pig, the day of the dog, and the hour of the dragon. 2 dragon signs, especially if one was the year, were considered exceptionally auspicious. The troop all congratulated him. Your son is destined for greatness. Wow, that's amazing. Back in San Francisco, Grace needed to pick out an American name for his son, a natural-born citizen of the United States. When Lee Hui Chun applied for his non-immigrant visa, his surname was changed from Lee, L-I, to the anglicised version Lee, L-E-E, Lee Hui Chun. And so on the boy's birth certificate, his last name was also written down as Lee, a subtle shift in spelling, demarking a break with the past and a new beginning. For the first name, Grace, who spoke little English, turned to a Chinese-American friend for help. He consulted with the midwife Mary E. Glover, who delivered the baby and signed over the birth certificate. She suggested Bruce. Okay, cool. Wonder if this nurse was the mother of the Glover guy that became Bruce Lee's friend and Black JKD student, right? Jesse Glover, is it? Not very sure. Yeah. Probably no mention of it somewhere. Probably just, just somebody who haven't had that name. But it sounds like a very European name. Alone with his son, Grace selected his Chinese name, Lee Chun Fan. Lee was a family surname. Chun was part of Hui Chun's father's name, Lee Chun Biao, and meant shake up, rouse or excite, and Fan is a Chinese character for San Francisco. So Bruce Lee's Chinese name meant shake up and excite San Francisco. Wow, amazing. Here's some more information here. How Lee Hui Chun came to America to raise funds from the overseas community to support the war effort back home. And there's some information on Bruce Lee. There's a baby. And some information on World War II, etc., and how some people were killed, etc., etc., where they were living. Okay. Lee Hui Chun was the only breadwinner for a household of 13 people. Oh my gosh. Bruce used to shake his fist at the Japanese planes flying over. That's in his young days in his movie roles. Okay, the illness and frailty that haunted Bruce during the occupation, the Japanese, lost its grip after the liberation. He became so hyperactive his family nicknamed him Never Sit Still. He was forever jumping, talking, playing or moving. Peter, his brother, remembers that if Bruce was ever quiet for a long period, his mother thought he must be sick. He almost had a disorder which filled him up with too much extra energy, like a wild horse that had been tied up, says Robert. When he wasn't knocking over furniture in a whirlwind of chaos, Bruce was questioning everything his parents told him to do, earning him yet another nickname. Why, baby? Why? Question mark, baby, right? A sceptical attitude towards authority lasts his entire life. The director of The Big Boss 1971 called Bruce in exasperation the Y Dragon. His parents discovered the only way to calm Bruce down, his off switch, was to hand him a comic book. He would read quietly for hours. Prior to the advent of television in Hong Kong in 1957, comic books and magazines like The Children's Paradise were a major form of entertainment. Bruce started with Kung Fu comic books and graduated to sword and sorcery, martial arts, and Chinese, Wu Xia, novels, etc., etc. All of those comic books and fantasy novels created a rich inner life. As he read, Bruce imagined himself as the story's hero. Yeah, we read about that. A certain comic, and it all played out in his favour, according to that comic book, apparently. Once Grace rebuked his son for acting selfishly. You are really no use, child. You seem to hardly have any soft spot for your own family. To defend himself, Bruce told a story. If we were ever walking in the forest and came across a tiger, I'd stay and fight the tiger and let the rest of you escape. Okay, more information. As part of the nascent movie industry, Lee Hoi Chun, Bruce's father, was friendly with all the major players, often inviting them over to his home. He also brought his children on set with him. None of them took to the jungle gym like backlots with as much excitement as Never Sit Still or Bruce. Bruce climbed the wooden ladders to reach the suspended studio lights. They say they were afraid he would lose his grip. He wanted to touch everything, from the cameras to the sound equipment, remembers one of the actresses, Feng So Po. He was so naughty they taught him hand games to distract him. When Bruce was 6 years old, the director of his father's latest film saw him on set and was so impressed that he offered him a part. At first, both Bruce and his father thought he was joking. Bruce was wide-eyed, open-mouthed and delirious, happy, says his mother Grace. He played a part of a pickpocket, etc., etc. Goes quite deep. For Bruce Lee fans, the movie that he was in, My Son Ah Chang, I think it is. For Bruce Lee fans, the movie is most notable for the new screen name given to the lead actor. Previously known as Little Hoi Chun, the film's opening credits list him as Li Long, or Dragon Lee. Given his pint-sized stature, this was quickly converted to Li Xiaolong, or Little Dragon Lee. Bruce loved his new screen name so much he insisted on using it in his private life. From then on, all his friends called him Little Dragon Lee, many of them having no idea that his birth name was Li Chun Fan. If names have a magical power, this film marked the moment when Bruce Chun Fan, Little Dragon Lee's before personal life and movie persona began to merge, overlap and bleed into each other. Wow. While Bruce stated or defended himself against insults, he quickly acquired a taste for combat and was soon instigating fights himself. His reputation shifted from someone you didn't want to mess with to the boy it was best to avoid. Parents began warning their sons to stay away from him because he probably beat them up. Pretty aggressive. Because he was smaller and weaker than all the other boys, right? He was never able, because of his illness, he was never able to learn how to ride a bike. He was also terrified of the water. Bruce was already quite mischievous. His sister sought to teach him a lesson by holding him underwater at the Lai Chi Kok amusement park swimming pool or pavilion and not letting him come back up, says Robert. It scared him so badly he never dared to swim again. Severely nearsighted, Bruce wore thick horn-rimmed glasses or Coca-Cola glasses, and his ear was pierced to protect him from boy-stealing snake demons. He even wore an earring to school, inviting much teasing from his classmates, says Robert. Most scrawny, four-eyed boys would have hidden in the corner, downcast, lost in fantasy, but not Bruce. Just like his character in My Son Ah Chang, he was pugnacious and short-tempered. Anyone who teased him or made him lose face, he fought right there, then, and right there. Right, you give it a go. Right. And more information. He hated school, fidgeting, he got terrible grades, that sort of stuff. Lots more information on him. Go through it pretty fast. So he goes to, following in the footsteps of his older brother, 10-year-old Bruce entered La Salle in September 1951 as a fifth grader, run by the Catholic Lassallean Brothers. La Salle, located at the time on Perth Street, was one of the most prestigious secondary schools in Hong Kong. Okay, so most of its students were upper and middle class Chinese and Eurasians, although there was a number of scholarship students. Okay, curriculum taught in English, producing bilingual graduates. Decent job, it's guaranteed decent job in the British colony, joined the police, the bank, the civil service, etc., etc. And Bruce Lee excelled in English. So they probably taught him the Summa Theologia, etc., etc., Roman Catholic stuff, and that's why he read it and knew it later on in life. And that. Bruce hated losing so much he refused to admit defeat. When he lost, we'd ask him how it happened, says Michael Lai. and he'd always come up with excuses for himself because he was like the boss of everyone and needed to win. Bruce's chief rival was David Lee, a tough boy with whom most people didn't mess. They battled several times. In the last contest it got heated and both Bruce and David pulled out their switchblades. The fight was stopped after Bruce lightly cut David's arm, drawing first blood. The injury wasn't serious, but neither boy wanted to take their enmity any further. Their hatred, the use of weapons instead of just fists and feet, shocked the more timid sensibilities of their middle-class LaSalle classmates. Only the most rebellious teddy boys, like Bruce and David, carried weapons on their persons to school. Bruce owned a switchblade, brass knuckles and other improvised devices. In school, their favourite weapon was bathroom chains and used to flush toilets. Yeah, remember those old toilets. Bruce explained those days kids improvised all kinds of weapons, even shoes with razors. Oh my gosh. With their gang life obsessions, the LaSalle boys were in the middle class way, imitating their elders. The triads, Chinese mafia, had been operating in the colony since the beginning of the opium trade, but the influence didn't take off until after Mao Zedong's victory in 1941, etc., etc. These influx of hundreds of thousands of desperate Chinese refugees, including ex-soldiers and triad members, proved a volatile mix, spreading corruption and violence across the Kowloon side of the colony. Okay, we're going to go through this book pretty quick because we're looking for a certain topic. If man starts learning Wing Chun Kung Fu, this must be Wing Chun. Who introduced him to Yip Man, and then he accepted a 15-year-old movie actor as a disciple and then sent him to learn the basics from Wong Shun Lung. We saw in a movie recently that fake Bruce Lee guy, right? Bruce Lee or something, and he actually went to this old studio, this old Kun, and it was titled Wong Shun Lung, right? And maybe that guy that was the instructor there was actually that guy. Yeah, it just seemed really weird like that. The actual actor, he was playing a part in that movie, something like that. Might have been Bruce Lee's fingers or something like that. He was looking for this finger technique, lost finger technique book or something. Yeah, something like that. Pretty sure it was that movie. Okay. So it goes on about him meeting William Shung, becoming great friends, learning from him, etc., etc. Unable to expel him, his Wing Chun seniors knocked Bruce around during class. These guys, some of them assistant instructors, gave him a hard time when he first studied Wing Chun because he was a skinny kid of 15. But yeah, because they didn't really want him there because he was an impure Chinese. We can't teach Chinese Kung Fu, they said, to an impure Chinese. We can't teach Chinese Kung Fu to an impure Chinese, claims William Shung. Bruce didn't belong to Caucasians or Chinese. He was in between and he was mixed blood. At that time, many Chinese people didn't accept someone like that. Ip Man refused to expel Bruce, but the little dragon was encouraged to study exclusively with Wong Shun Lung and avoided the main class until things settled down. This is the rooftop battle that Bruce had. Bruce Lee gave him a hiding. This guy, right, on the rooftop. Buoyed by his triumph, Bruce's confidence and fighting spirit increased. He became even more obsessed with Wing Chun. The contest taught him, on the rooftop, that success does not come naturally. One had to train and fight, says Wang Shunglong. Every day he practiced boxing, side kicks, wooden dummy and so on. When he had finished with all this, he would sit down and meditate on what he had done. He trained himself in this way for a long time. And then he did his boxing stunt at school. And that Wang Shunglong says he attacked Bruce's weak points and guided him to make full use of his strong points, says Wang. There's a lot of good information here on Bruce's cha-cha dancing. Margaret Loom and Bruce practiced the cha-cha around 1957. I wonder if that's Wang Shunglong's daughter. Yeah, here's Bruce Lee in a refined gentleman role in a film. Yeah, watch bits and pieces of that. Okay, Banished. First girl in Bruce's life was Margaret Loom. She was also a child actor, screen name Man Lan, from a prominent film family. Their mothers introduced the two of them when she was 11 and Bruce was 13. By all accounts, their relationship was purely platonic. She was more of a gal pal than a girlfriend. Adolescent Bruce was actually very prone to feel shy in front of young women, says Robert. Bruce's favourite thing to do in front of them ladies was show off his muscles. Yeah, that's what he did in his older life, right? His adult life. He liked to ask them to try to use their fingernails to try to pinch up a bit of fat, and when they couldn't, he'd laugh proudly. Margaret, like Bruce, had a rebellious streak, and she was also a bit of a tomboy. Bruce would often tease her by saying, if she didn't wear a skirt and have a figure, I'd surely treat her as my sworn brother. As they got older, they would go out to the nightclubs for dinner and dancing. We used to go out dancing at Hotel Carlton, the Shetton Inn, and the Champagne nightclub, just opposite the Miramar Hotel. Margaret says, the one with more money would pay more, but we always shared the bill. In the mid-1950s, Hong Kong's kids were jitterbugging to clean-cut American pop like Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock. Anders Nelson, a musician who had a part in Way of the Dragon, says the scene was more Pat Boone than Little Richard. It wasn't until 1957 that Elvis Presley rolled up on Hong Kong shores and teens like Bruce began greasing back their hair and gyrating in their blue suede shoes. Yeah, this Anders Nelson guy, according to an article we read on Bruce Lee playing around, having secret loves, all that sort of stuff, he makes some information, right? Gives some information. And he goes on about Bruce and Margaret hanging out. Margaret was not only his dance partner but also his getaway driver. I was his saviour, she says. Every time he engaged in a fight, I was always somewhere nearby waiting in my car with the engine running. He would jump in and I'd floor it. While Bruce and Margaret were palling around like buddies, Bruce took a romantic interest in another woman, Amy Chan, who would later become famous in Asia by a film named Park Yan. I wonder if she's related to Jackie Chan. Who knows? Neither of us had much money to spend, so we went to Kowloon Dong, near where the MTR station is today. Amy says, the gardens over there had trees. We would shake the trees to make the flowers fall, yellow and white like sandalwood flowers. On the weekends they often joined a larger group, friends for tea dance, etc, etc. Amy remembers that Bruce was different depending on how big the group was. If there were a lot of people having a good time, then he would have an insanely good time. She says, but when there were only a few people around, he was very quiet. He would rationally analyse things and teach you things he didn't know, like how to be a good person. But he was very masculine, extremely manly. No matter what he said, he was very definite about it. So he was a very good person, and he taught people how to be a good person. Yeah, keep that in mind. While there was a real attraction between Bruce and Amy, their relationship didn't become too serious. As a teenager, Bruce seemed to have an ironic wariness of romantic attachments. When he was 15, he wrote this playful poem about love and relationships. If any one of the young women in his life could be considered Bruce's high school sweetheart, it was Pearl So. She was the one real romance of his youth, says Robert Lee. Pearl's family and Bruce's were extremely close. Her dad was a friend of their fathers from the stage, Phoebe says. Pearl's mum, Eva, was really close with their mum, just like sisters. She came over to our house, or their house, every day just to hang out. Bruce called Eva Auntie So, and treated her like a second mother, etc., etc. Bruce took to dancing. He frequently visited Pearl's home after school to practice, and so forth. Here's a piece on how passionate he was or serious about cha-cha. A Philippine woman who owned a dance studio in Simsha Sway. He picked it up from her, looks of it. As part of his homework, he kept a personal note of cha-cha fancy steps that numbered over 100, including moves like banana boat and rubbing and double, etc., etc. And he vetoed his own steps. Turned his obsession into a contest. That's his competitive character. Okay, more. What's this? More information about his movie. About a movie. His father had a drug addiction, opium. Small pieces of cooked opium. Hui Chun detox at home using the time-honoured Chinese method, taping off his drug consumption by drinking rice wine spiked with small pieces of cooked opium for a week before finally quitting cold turkey. It was very difficult for him to stop, Phoebe recalls. He had diarrhea often. Wow. After this brutal ordeal, Hui Chun never touched opium again. Having dealt with the father's drug addiction, the family turned to confront Bruce's problems with violence. He had come up with a new way to start fights and test out his Wing Chun. Ever the actor, he would dress up in traditional Chinese costume, mandarin collar, flowing robe, etc., and wander the streets with everyone else in Western style clothing. Yeah, read about that. And then he'd like, what are you looking at? Do I look weird or something? And have a fight, He used to was punching dummies and so forth. Okay. Okay. Bruce didn't want to leave his friends and family. It felt like punishment, like he was being sent away, cast off. He was being sent to America by his family, right? His father, mother. Bruce didn't want to go, but his father forced him, says Hawkins. Is that Hawkins Chun? Bruce feared his father and had to comply. Phoebe says Dad's intuition was to let him eat bitter or suffer in the USA. Getting into trouble and all that sort of stuff, so he'd be set there to suffer, right? Okay, something about he was studying medicine or pharmacy or whatever he's got to do, become a dentist. Bruce decided it would be useful to pick up a flashy kung fu style to impress potential American students. One of his father's close friends, Master Xu Hong-sang, was an expert in northern kung fu, known for its acrobatic leaps and high kicks. Bruce learned northern style for showmanship, says Hawkins. The deal was Master Sang would teach Bruce his fancy forms in return for Bruce instructing him in cha-cha. Bruce went to Master Sang's kung fu club every morning at 7 a.m. for 2 months to exchange lessons. Master Sang later jokingly complained it turned out to be a bad deal for him. Bruce was such a fast learner, he mastered the movements of several complex forms, while Master Sang never quite got the hang of the basic cha-cha steps. Worked out more for Bruce, right? Okay, and it's a stage where Bruce transformed from a teenage punk into a more mature and sober young man. Okay, and he suddenly changed, calmed down, all that sort of stuff. This is Bruce's college essay. About 4 years of hard training in the art of Kung Fu, began to understand and felt the principles of gentleness, the art of neutralizing the effect of the opponent's effort, etc., etc. That's when he started to calm down. Yeah. The joke in China is Kung Fu is a way to trick 13-year-old boys into meditating. Bruce had started his martial arts path as a punk. From this instant forward he would speak and think more and more like a Taoist monk. Taoism and Kung Fu served as a psychological self-corrective water to douse the flames. Because he was a dragon, a fire element. I am a horse and an earth element. Fire, horse, and an earth element, apparently. Okay, here's some more information here. Okay, he's talking about his best friend Margaret, his gal pal, and then Pearl. Bruce promised Pearl he would write her frequently when he went to America, something like that. And he's outside Ruby Charles restaurant in Seattle around 1960, working as a busboy, etc. Goes into a lot of information about China, Hong Kong, etc., etc. It's Cha-Cha. Okay, must be Jesse Glover. He meets him at some demonstration. When Jesse discovered his connection to Bruce, he made sure to walk ahead of him each morning to school. Every time he passed a telephone pole, he would punch and kick it, pretending like he didn't notice Bruce behind him. For days, Jesse did this without eliciting a reaction. Finally, he screwed up his courage and asked, "Is your name Bruce Lee?" "Bruce Lee is my name. What do you want?" "Do you practice Kung Fu?" "I do." "Would you teach me?" Jesse asked, his heart in his mouth. When Bruce hesitated, Jesse continued, "I am very anxious to learn. I went to California looking for instruction, but I couldn't find anyone who would teach me." Bruce looked at Jesse for a long time, weighing the request in his mind. These were the words that Bruce had dreamed of hearing since his buddy Hawkins had cast doubt on his plans to teach Wing Chun in America. Okay, he knew he would receive criticism from conservative Chinese chauvinists like Ruby Chow. Sure enough, after she discovered Bruce had an African American student, she rebuked him. "You are teaching black guys this and that. They are going to use it to beat up on the Chinese." "It would have to be in place where we would practice in secret," Bruce finally said. "We could use my apartment," Jesse suggested. "Do you live alone?" "I have 2 roommates. They will have to leave when I teach you. I'll get rid of them." Okay. Bruce gives him a lecture. They arrive at his apartment and ask him what did he do, what kind of background in the martial arts did he have, or judo, boxing, whatever. Okay, then they went through the paces, and I guess Jesse was impressed by him. Then he meets James DeMille, bit of a tough guy. Thought he could take out Bruce, apparently. Got a tap on the forehead and realised, yeah, Bruce was the real deal, real fast and all this sort of stuff. Trying to find the information on Amy Sambo, Japanese American girl that he really fell for, head over heels. Looks like he fought a Japanese guy. Go back a bit. because apparently he insulted this guy. You insulted me and my country, Yoichi declared. Bruce was furious. Jesse was afraid the fight was going to happen right there. Bruce looked away in an effort to control his rage. Yoichi kept moving into Bruce's line of vision in an attempt to break down his confidence. When the bus finally arrived, Yoichi sat in front of Bruce and started to discuss the rules in an abrasive manner. Forget the rules, Bruce snarled, the veins in his neck bulging. I'm going all out. Why don't you stop talking, Jesse said to Yoichi. We will move to different seats. Jesse spent the rest of the trip downtown trying to calm Bruce down and get him to agree not to go all out. He was afraid Bruce might kill Yoichi. When they reached the wire, Bruce, Ed, Howard and Jesse went directly to the handball court. Yoichi and his two friends went to a bathroom where he changed into a white karate gi. Bruce tested the wood floors with his shoes and decided to go barefoot. He took off his dress shirt and did a couple of deep knee bends in his undershirt. As the two men faced off, Bruce wanted to make one thing clear. You challenged me, right? Yeah, Yoichi said. You asked for this fight? Yeah. Alright, Bruce said. Jesse, who was the referee, stepped out to explain the rules. The fight would consist of 3 2-minute rounds, with the winner being the man who won 2 of the 3. Ed Hart, serving as timekeeper, pulled out a stopwatch. Bruce stood in a relaxed Wing Chun stance, right foot forward, right hand pointing at Yoichi's nose, left palm next to right elbow. Yoichi started in a classical karate stance with one leg extended behind him, one hand facing Bruce with palm out, the other hand in a fist chambered at his waist. Ready, set, go, Jesse shouted. Yoichi immediately switched to cat stance, etc. Bruce Lee blasted his chest, sent him flying back 6 feet in the air, so he had that power, right? He had that power in his kicks when he was a young guy, okay? And he beat this guy up. Jesse and Ed Hart ran over to Yoichi to check his pulse. After a few minutes, he regained consciousness. The first question from Yoichi's lips was, how long did it take me to defeat him? Or how long did it take him, Bruce, to defeat him? Hart looked at his stopwatch. It read 11 seconds. Feeling sorry for the guy, he doubled it 22 seconds. As Yoichi pulled himself off the floor, he said, I want a rematch. I didn't train properly for this fight. I want to do it again. I never wanted to fight you in the first place, Bruce replied. There's no point in fighting you again. As far as I'm concerned, this is over. I will never talk to anyone else about what happened. As everyone left, Bruce made his friends promise they wouldn't discuss the fight with outsiders. Yoichi's buddies leaked their details to the rest of the school. To save face, Yoichi asked Bruce if he could become his disciple and take private lessons with him. Bruce told him he would have to join his club's formal class and learn with the rest of the beginners. Yoichi swallowed his pride and attended classes for a month before dropping out. A lot of people took exception to the things Bruce said, recalls Taki Kimura, one of his students and friends. But when they saw what he could do, they all wanted to join him. Okay. This guy couldn't handle the training, right? Dropped out. So he fought and beat a Japanese guy. Student, whatever. Goes on about Kung Fu is Tao. During his first year in America, Bruce and his high school sweetheart Pearl, TSO, slowly grew apart. Their letters became less and less frequent. Hoping to salvage their long-distance relationship, Pearl flew to Seattle to see Bruce, but he forgot to pick her up from the airport. After waiting for hours, she grew so angry she hopped a flight to San Francisco. When Bruce realised his mistake, he made numerous phone calls to beg her forgiveness, but she refused to accept his apology. After Pearl, Bruce dated a number of young women, but none for any length of time. He was a charmer and a bit of a player. Okay, so he was a bit of a player. If a pretty girl was anywhere near, Bruce would perk up and start a spontaneous kung fu demo, says James DeMille. He would point to James and explain how fast and tough he was, and he'd probably knock him over and under. Bruce liked to take his dates to the movies. How could we let the valuable but short autumn days slip away, etc. Okay, so he was a player, like fooled around with lots of different women at that time. May have slept with him, may not have, right? Probably a flirty guy, because his whole thing would have been, it's martial arts. It wasn't until his first year of college that Bruce Lee fell head over heels in love. He was lounging with friends in the student centre, the Hub, when he noticed a stunning Japanese-American sophomore named Amy Sambo sitting in the far corner. Entranced, Bruce left his friends and moved to a nearby table to get a closer look. When she walked past him to go to class, he suddenly said, "Hello!" He grabbed her forearm with his index finger and thumb. He squeezed with such power that Amy's knees buckled and she nearly dropped her books on the floor. So that's when he met her. That's what we were looking for. He met her. "Let go of me before I really get angry," she exclaimed. When he did, she asked, "Why did you do that?" "I was just showing my friends how much power can be exerted with only 2 fingers." "What a jerk," she said as she marched away. While not a particularly suave approach, it left an impression. Literally, the black and blue bruises on her arms lasted for days. For the next several weeks, wherever Amy went, Bruce popped up out of nowhere, trying to make it up to her. Bruce would ask, "How do you feel?" "Are you okay? My name is Bruce Lee." He would bring up any random topic of conversation just to talk to her. Bruce pursued Amy with the same single-minded devotion as he did Kung Fu perfection. In love, as in combat, his strategy was to overwhelm the target. One day, she stepped on a nail at ballet practice and needed crutches to get to class. When Bruce saw her struggling up a long flight of concrete stairs north of the football field, he ran to her and offered help, and he ended up carrying her up there after ignoring her protest. What followed over the next 2 years was a tempestuous, on-again, off-again relationship. The magnetism was mutual and physical. Both of them were beautiful and both were dancers. "When I perform, it's almost orgasmic. It's very sexual," and Bruce was like that too. Amy says, "I'm horribly attracted to talent," and Bruce was a kinetic genius. He could just look at her movement and assimilate it. There, she verified that, right? As that Kung Fu master that taught him those northern Kung Fu style moves, right? And he mastered them in 3 days, which was very impossible. Most people would take months, years. Okay. He assimilated it, he absorbed it, he became that movement. He moved in a way that no other Asians moved. When she challenged him to do a pirouette, he pulled it off in 1 try. She also teased him about the stiffness of his cha-cha. "Why don't you put a little funk into it?" After placing some R&B records on the turntable, he was quickly able to feel the music and get down. "It's very hard to teach someone that, but Bruce had it," Amy recalls. He could get funky. Everything else going on here? Bruce was so proud to be Chinese he was bursting with it. Okay, one day on campus, Bruce pulled her into an open office in Parrington Hall on the pretext that they could study together there in privacy. It turned out to belong to Theodore Rothko, the university's internationally acclaimed Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. When Rothko walked in and caught them, he declared, "I'm Rothko the poet. What are you doing in my room?" Amy froze, but Bruce stood up, walked right over to him and stuck out his hand. "I'm Bruce Shifu Lee. Kung Fu master. Good to meet you." "What is Kung Fu?" Rothko asked. Delighted by the question, Bruce went to the chalkboard and launched into a 15-minute lecture on Kung Fu, complete with diagrams and explanation of the principles of yin and yang. Amy wanted to crawl under the door, but Rothko was mesmerized. When Bruce finished, Rothko said, "I think I understand. Thank you. Please come back anytime you want to talk more about Kung Fu." The next day, Rothko recounted the story to his class. "I met a young man, and he is supposed to be a master of the martial arts. He seemed pretty lethal." Wow. Getting that from a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, right? Brilliant. Difficulty in Bruce and Amy's relationship stemmed from their divergent upbringings. Bruce had a traditional 1950s view, etc., etc. She felt that he was suffocating her, always wanting to know where she was going, with whom, whether she wanted to go to Chinatown without him. Whenever she wanted to go to Chinatown without him, Bruce insisted that one of the Kung Fu students serve as their bodyguard. "Yeah, so it's getting in the face too much, right?" Bruce repeatedly asked Amy to marry him, all this sort of stuff. She believed they could be together, but she was also afraid they might kill each other. She worried he just wanted to lock her down, keep her by his side all the time. She wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, and she didn't think deep down he was ready for the responsibility. "I'm taking care of my mother who was ill," Amy said. "Are you capable of supporting us?" When she finally dumped her for good during the spring semester of 1963, Bruce was devastated. For weeks he could barely leave his room. Bruce was heartbroken, Jesse Glover recalls. He didn't do anything during this period except draw pictures of Amy and talk to his close friends about the emotions he felt. Oh, how sad. I guess he got over it eventually. He creates the Jun Fan Kung Fu Institute after himself. A very American thing to do. He wrote, a letter to his former sweetheart Pearl So, laying out the mission statement for his life. Wow. And 21-year-old Bruce Lee concluded by framing his career goals as part of a spiritual quest. He didn't just want worldly success, he also desired inner peace. And the first obstacle to Bruce's grand plan came from a senior student, Jesse Glover. He and several other original club members who were used to training with Bruce for free were put off by Bruce's efforts to formalise and commercialise his art. At first, Jesse and the others avoided Bruce's new school. I found it a little difficult to start calling someone who I had been running around with for 2 years Shifu or Sifu, Jesse says, using the Chinese word for master. Annoyed, Bruce made it clear that he wasn't going to share his secrets or reveal his best techniques to anyone who wasn't strongly in his corner. This provoked Jesse, who was almost as prideful as Bruce, to split away and take Leroy Garcia and James DeMille with him. The breakup was in many ways more painful for Bruce than the one with Amy Sambo. The rebel faction opened their own school, not a franchise of the Jun Fan Kung Fu Institute, but a competitor in the basement of the New Richmond Hotel. The market for Kung Fu in Seattle in 1962 was not big enough to support 2 Queens, and Jesse's school closed in 5 months. He tried again, opening a second school on Pike Street in 1963. Jesse did the teaching and James DeMille was responsible for recruiting. As the school was struggling to survive with only a handful of students, DeMille made a trip to Bruce's brand new studio on the University Way with its 50 plus disciples. After the divorce, the relationship between Jesse, Jim and Bruce was overtly friendly and polite, but carried an undertow of hurt feelings and betrayal. That day, a handful of Bruce's students cornered DeMille and asked, "Why did you and Jesse stop training with Bruce?" "We didn't like some of the changes he was making," DeMille bluntly told him. "We felt like he was holding things back, leaving out important pieces of what makes his system work." That's what a lot of Kung Fu masters do, right? Or teachers do. They teach you so much, but they don't want you to beat them up, right? Or defeat them or get better than them. So they, don't tell you certain key elements, right? And he went mad when he found out, when some students told him about it. DeMille. Bruce pointed his finger to DeMille's chest and declared, "You have no right to make comments to my class." "You are right," DeMille backed down. "I'm sorry." Still furious, Bruce slapped a pair of gloves he was holding into his open palm. He seemed ready to attack. DeMille thought to himself, to fight Bruce when he is calm is insanity, but to do it when he is mad is to invite certain death. DeMille had a handgun, a trigger of a handgun in his pocket, right? He had a handgun in his pocket. If Bruce leapt at him, DeMille planned to blow a hole in him. "I apologise again, I was wrong." "I'm sorry," DeMille said as he slowly backed away, turned around and walked out the door. It was the last time the 2 young men ever spoke. Could have shot him, eh? Wow, his father apologises to him for treating him like the way he did. Very, very hard on him. Because he realised what he'd become, right? He'd become somebody. Okay, and some more information here. Okay, so Bruce's taste in fashion occasionally got him into trouble. A friend said, Bruce explained to an American friend, "This is Hong Kong. They respect your clothing first before they respect you." His taste in fashion occasionally got him into trouble. One evening he went out with a female friend, Eunice Lam, to the Eagle Nest in Hilton Hotel, blah blah blah. And he was the centre of attention with his cha-cha dragon steps. On the ferry back to Kowloon, he took off his jacket, and some wannabe tough guys began to mock him, curse him for looking like a dandy. Bruce smiled at them and said, "You'd better keep your mouth shut or you'll be in trouble later." When they reached the Star Ferry pier, the ruffians alighted first and waited near the flagpole at the corner of the pier. Bruce guided Eunice past him and toward her home. The thugs followed, taunting Bruce. "Where are you going so fast? Do you have a hurry home to Mama?" Eunice was terrified, but Bruce was calm and composed. When the thugs got too close, Bruce spun to face them. Suddenly Eunice heard screaming and looked back. One of the ruffians was on the ground grabbing his leg in terrible pain. The other was fleeing in terror. Bruce smiled at her and said, "Just treated him to my shin kick." What a cheeky guy. When Bruce's cousin Frank, who was a few years older, heard the story, he shook his head and made a joke about Bruce's growing maturity. If that had been a few years ago, Frank said, Bruce would have beaten them all up as soon as they got off the ferry. And he invites Doug Palmer, his brightest American student, to Hong Kong, visit him in Hong Kong. When Doug, who was 6'4" and 220 pounds, walked into the apartment, Bruce's entire family stood back and gasped. We had seen tall British guys before, recalls Robert, but it was like a giant came to visit. We had to let it sink in a bit. Bruce took Doug to visit a man in his apartment at the top of a high rise. He was a smiling man with a twinkle in his eyes, slight and getting on in years but still fit, recalls Doug. Before they arrived, Bruce made Doug promise that he wouldn't do or say anything to reveal he was Bruce's student. That man was old school and didn't believe Kung Fu should be taught to foreigners. As Doug sat in the corner pretending to be clueless, he had the opportunity to watch two of the most famous Kung Fu artists of the 20th century practice Chi Sao for hours in their undershirts. It was the first time Doug had ever seen Bruce unable to dominate someone. The man had it over him, man. No matter what he did, he had him all tied up and stuff. What the heck's this? Oh, so he did get circumcised, according to Doug. His brother. Ask him, how does it feel? It doesn't hurt. Looking at the bandages, etc. Ooh, it's in pain, eh? Come back in pain after 15 minutes walk. At the end of July, Doug and Bruce packed to leave. Bruce and Hoi Chun, his father, hugged, the reconciliation complete. It was the last time Bruce would see his father alive. Sunny side of the bay. Linda Emery, his wife, right, how he met her. She briefly dated a half Japanese boy in high school until her mother found out and forbade her. It was okay for Linda to have Asian girlfriends but not boyfriends. Okay. One day during her senior year, Linda was hanging by the lockers with Sue Ann and some of her cheerleading friends when a former homecoming queen swept into the school, Amy Sambo. On her arm was a deliciously handsome young man wearing a custom-tailored black suit, skinny black tie, shimmering purple shirt, a hat with a skinny brim, and a long beige coat. The sight of Amy and her dashing new boyfriend set envious tongues wagging, especially among the clique of cheerleaders at the end of the hallway. "Who is that?" asked Linda. "Oh, that's Bruce Lee," answered Sue and Kate. "Isn't he beautiful?" Yeah, the cheerleaders collectively swooned. "It's like he walked straight out of West Side Story," one of them giggled. "Yes, he looks like George Chakiris," said Linda. "Suave, debonair, big city. He's here to lecture in Mr. Wilson's class on Chinese philosophy," Sue Ann said. "How do you know?" Linda asked. "I take Kung Fu lessons from him." The girls burst out laughing. "I bet. Is that what you call it?" Linda's eyes followed Bruce as he walked down the hall, laughing and talking and throwing playful punches with some of the kids. She was more than a little impressed. That summer, Linda took a job with her mum at Sears, etc., etc. She would tease her friend about a dreamy Kung Fu teacher. "Is he why you are studying all that strange self-defense stuff? Why don't you come to a lesson with me and let's see what it's like?" Sue added, and did. So she probably did. Okay, then like that Dragon Lee, Bruce Lee story, she gets invited to an expensive place for dinner or something, right? Nah, only you and me, replied. Stunned, she was only able to nod in response. Wow. Went to the Space Needle or something like that. Pulled up in his car, souped up 57 Ford. Steve McQueen and all that. Like he'd say to him, pull up. You know, he couldn't really control the car, fast car, all that sort of stuff. Steve McQueen took him for a ride down the highway. You know, floored it, and Bruce Lee was like nuts because she's could have killed us, man. He was carrying pretty much under the dashboard. And Steve McQueen did it for a joke, scared the shit out of him, right? And every time he pulled up in his car, on the sidewalk and stuff, he said, "Hey Chuck, let's go do this." Or Bob, let's go do this, right? And they go making excuses. "Oh no, I got a class to teach." "Oh no, I got to go home and look after my sick mother," all that sort of stuff, right? Because they knew he was like a badass driver, you know. He wasn't a very good driver. So he's with Linda. He's got to know that Amy Sambo. Okay. James Lynn Yim Lee, one of his students, a hard man, a hard drinker and a fighter. A gymnast, a weightlifter and amateur boxer. Oh wow. Throughout his 20s and 30s he studied jiu-jitsu and Silum Kung Fu. Wow. His specialty was iron palm. You can stack up 5 bricks, ask you which one you wanted him to break, and then shatter your pick while leaving the rest intact. Ooh, bit of a Frank Dukes, John Claude Van Damme. Al Novak. I wonder if he's related to that guy. There's a Kim Novak, the guy in Game of Death that played Stick. Yeah? Looking at who's this Ellen Joe? Oh, okay, she had bodybuilding and stuff. Interests. Okay. So he befriends this Ellen person. Something about a book, Chinese Kung Fu, philosophical art of self-defense. What's just he clever saying? It cost $600 to print 1,000 copies, which James sold through his mail order business for $5. Profits from the book helped Bruce pay off various expenses. His primary reason for doing the book was that he needed the money, Jesse says. The secondary reason was to declare war on traditional Kung Fu styles. James was still furious that his old master, T.Y. Wong, had accused James of stiffing him. But he was even angrier than everything he had learned from what T.Y. Wong was useless against Bruce's more modern approach. Jimmy spent years training in classical Kung Fu, says Gary Kaganan, a long-time student of James, and he felt after having met and trained with Bruce that he wasted precious years learning sets and forms, not learning how to fight. It's like that Bruce Lee clone, Bruce Leong, what his name is. He's been taught by these 2 supposed masters, elephant trunk, fish in water, all this sort of crap, right? And he went up against some villainous Kung Fu master and got his ass kicked heaps of times. And he figured out what your Kung Fu is crap, right? And then they done dirty on him and joined up with this villainous Kung Fu master that he kept getting hiding from, until he meets the blind man, Simon Yun or something, and learns Real kupu. Okay. This is a really interesting book. Okay. Goes deeper into what he set himself and what he achieved. Okay, this is when they met the mother, right? And he states, I want to marry your daughter. We are leaving on Monday. Bruce declared to her hostile family, I'm Chinese, by the way. The joke didn't lighten the mood. Race was the underlying issue for the family and the country. Miscegenation